There we go. I did it.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming back. If you were here a couple weeks ago, I apologize. I've been super ill and still a little under the weather. So if I stop and quickly mute myself to have a coughing fit, I apologize ahead of time. But for the most part, I am super good to go and really excited to share with you today. I have a story to tell you about some work that means a whole lot to me, that I feel really lucky to have been able to do because it's been a learning experience for me too. I have not started my career in self-management interventions. Again, it is Thea just explained my kind of whole thing, stemming from being a classroom teacher in North Carolina in the United States, was about teaching students with extensive support needs in a way that was really meaningful and gave full access to academic experiences and, more importantly, academic outcomes that translate into quality of life issues. Just the right that everybody has to learn how to read and decode, the right that everybody has to learn how to geek out about the solar system, the right everybody has to be able to figure out how to problem solve mathematically so that they can do things they want to do out in the world. So that's been my motivation. But partnering with my good buddy and colleague at Cal Poly, Stephen Crutchfield, who came to the field with a lot of self-management intervention under his belt, but not as much experience making things accessible for students with more extensive support needs, has been a big joy in my career. It's been fun. And so we've kind of been able to put our brains together and figure out how to hopefully enhance the lives of people with disabilities, including people with the most extensive support needs, using some self-management strategies. And I imagine you all have backgrounds in self-management. You understand or have at least learned about self-monitoring interventions already. So I hope to not tell you a redundant story. I'm really excited about what we have done. I think it's new, or at least I think it's building on some things that exist in the field, but in an innovative way, and in a way that I hope pushes the envelope a bit. So I just want to tell you about what we've done. And thank you again for being here. I'm immediately irritated that the code word and the star are not in sync. I just added those real quick and it all got funky. But your first keyword is goals. So there you go. The other two are embedded. If I just blaze right over them, please stop me and be like, hey, there's a keyword, and I will stop and you should all write it down. I have heard that, I teach classes and excuse me, I love to teach. I love to teach adults. I love to be interactive and engaging. But for this talk, it sounds like a great format is for me to just deliver what I've got to say and for you all to consume. So I won't try to make us do a bunch of stuff, but I really do invite you to ask questions, stop me if there's something that you want to dig into more. I want this to be as meaningful for you and respectful of your time and your time being here as possible. So thank you. Here's what I want to talk about today. I want to start with some basic kind of overviews of the concept of self-management, with the understanding that this is, again, something we probably all have under our belt, at least a little bit. But I just want to kind of tell you what I think of self-management and what I mean by that, and kind of where, how we use that understanding as we did this project. And the real meat of what I want to talk about is this middle part, thinking about barriers and thinking about accessibility. That's kind of how I approach the research that I do, the teaching that I do at Cal Poly. I teach people to be like barrier detectives and kind of really analyze and look at and see the things that are in front of us relative to the goals we have to supporting people, so that we can find those barriers and make them go away as best we can with the science we have, with the technologies that we have. So I want to talk about kind of how I did that with what we know with the existing research on self-monitoring interventions, especially to try to make this more meaningful, to really leverage this science to help people with more extensive support needs, including autism spectrum disorder. And then I want to share with you what we did, this tool that we've made that's tech-based and I'm very excited about. what I really want to do is show you the guts of this program. I want to show you the science underlying this program. I'm not trying to sell you this program. It is available commercially as of like right now through Attainment Company, but I really just want to pull back the curtain and show you why we developed it the way we did and kind of what we've learned from it so far. So I hope that that's what you can take from this. So specifically, I do want to talk to you about and hopefully leave you with some sense of how to create self-monitoring interventions that are accessible for people with extensive support needs, which I'm defining as students with autism or autistic people or people with an intellectual disability who need some of the most extensive supports in order to access the world. I also want to review the recent self-management intervention research that Stephen and I did, because it was a lot and it's kind of a fun story and a fun iterative process. We'll get a little researchy and look at some of those, some of that outcome data. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then I'm going to end with kind of where I am now in this process, which is the next step in what I'm hoping to do next. I have really put a lot of thought into how to teach people with extensive support needs to really understand self-management, which means teach people about goals. What are goals? How do you identify behaviors that are personally relevant to yourself? How do you set a criteria for yourself? Do you understand what criteria are? So all unpacking kind of all of the conceptual pieces of self-management so that we can teach it in a way that, again, is going to create the most independence for populations that we're hoping to support. So I want to tell you a little bit and show you a little bit about the work I've done and where we're going with that. I'm going to pause and I'm going to clear my throat. Okay, so when I say self-management, I'm talking about this collection of cognitive processes and behaviors that allows people to voluntarily, to the greatest extent possible individually, control their own emotions and actions. And the reason that they're doing that is to act in goal-directed ways. So it's not just willy-nilly, there's a purpose. And the reason that that we do this is to try to achieve something that is personally meaningful. So broadly speaking, self-management is a combination of self-regulation and self-control. And of course, those are very nebulous, internal, individualistic processes. When I talk about self-management as an umbrella term, the techniques that I'm talking about are self-goal setting, self-monitoring, and self-reinforcement. All of these pieces are usually involved in self-management interventions, but goal setting and reinforcement are usually adult-directed in the science that we have so far. Most of the research we have is on self-monitoring, but the rest, again, is very much directed by other people, which kind of begs the question, is it really self-monitoring? I mean, who are you monitoring for? So I'm going to unpack and talk more about the concepts of self-goal setting and self-reinforcement in addition to self-monitoring. Self-goal setting being that personal ability to identify personally relevant behaviors that you want to change, and the ability to set your own short and long-term goals that you can work towards. Self-monitoring then is that independent ability to collect data about some dimensions of your own behavior over time. And then self-reinforcement is really twofold. It's the ability to independently and consume those data, understand and interpret your own data, and determine for yourself if you've reached your goal or not. And if you have, then give yourself a reward. So again, these are all very specifically independent processes that typically in the research that we have done on self-management for students with disabilities has been limited to self-monitoring itself. And of course, because self-monitoring is everywhere, like I have my self-monitoring device on my wrist right now that told me how well I slept or how not well I slept last night and what my heart rate is right now, and that I should stand up because I've only done it 2 times today. So all of these things are ways that we have, as a society, started to just naturally self-monitor, maybe too much of the things that we do, but it's very much ingrained in our culture now, in just kind of our day-to-day lives. And like I've mentioned, and like you probably know, there's quite a bit of evidence supporting self-management interventions when we particularly talk about self-monitoring intervention, including for students with autism spectrum disorder. And so the National Professional Development Center and the National Autism Standards Project both list self-management strategies as evidence-based practices, but again, the interventions in those studies are self-monitoring interventions that are still often really teacher-directed or adult-directed in many ways. So some of the limitations that we have, even though we've got this great, robust body of research kind of giving us the green light, is there's not much for supporting students with less extensive support needs with SMIs. And again, I've said this like 18 times now, but the research is pretty limited to self-monitoring only, not self-goal setting, not self-reinforcement, and certainly not like the package of them all. So this is a little bit of our story. Back in like, really, I think that's 2011 to 2015, Stephen Crutchfield out of the University of Kansas is earning his doctoral degree and doing a post-bac. And he just really got into this concept of self-management for students with autism. And he did a lot of work through some centers on using iConnect, which is a tech-based program or app that can help people self-monitor. And it's a great way to use technology because it collects the data within the app. It's easy to use. There's no paper pencil. The materials are all right there and contained, but it's very much self-monitoring only. He did a lot of the seminal work, though, that we do have on self-monitoring for people with autism. When we started working together at Cal Poly, we started to kind of, again, talk about our shared interests and our tangential interest in how we could kind of combine what we know to help more people. So we wrote a book in 2018 as part of the ProEd series on autism spectrum disorders. And this was really a manual on how to use self-management interventions in a broad way to support a lot of people with disabilities. Stephen brought his knowledge of supporting students with less extensive support needs and kind of what the research already says. And then I took that and kind of did what I do and made it more accessible for people with more extensive support needs. So I task analyzed kind of the things he was suggesting for self-monitoring interventions and self-goal setting and self-reinforcement. We were really careful to talk across those three buckets. And I provided like visual supports and worksheets that could be accessible that have very little language, have picture supports, really help to kind of scaffold the cognitive pieces that are involved so that more people could access and be meaningfully engaged in self-management. So that was cool. We enjoyed our book. And then right before COVID shut down the world, we submitted a grant proposal to the Institution of Education Sciences under the U.S. Department of Education to take our ideas from this manual and make a tech-based version. We wanted to leverage technology to kind of bring alive what we did and make it something that could be level. It's like students could use this whether they have less extensive or more extensive support needs, and those supports are built right into the app. So we pitched that and were funded, which was super cool, except for then we owed the government some research, and it was the year 2020, 2021. So we had a really tough time with phase one of this project. Obviously, we had a lot of our participants who had COVID, a lot of changes that had to be made, really a difficult time getting into schools, of course. But we still were able to work on this kind of proof of concept, this idea. We were able to make a draft kind of prototype, and we were able to get it in front of kids and see what happened. And that was amazing and really encouraging. And it seeded the second phase of our research. So we submitted another proposal for a phase two to kind of scale up a little bit what we were doing and bring this product to full development and then really test it. And that's what we did over the last 2 years. We just finished this project last June. So some questions that kind of popped up is this, especially well, throughout the whole 3 years of these of the funded project, is really at trying to explicitly understand what the barriers are for students or for children with more extensive support needs to benefit from self-management, and how can we ameliorate those barriers? That was just a really big, important question. And we also kind of wondered, like, will it work, and for whom? Like, are there limits? What are the limits? Like, who is it? Like, at what point do we need to say maybe this isn't meaningful? This, or are we trying to push this too hard? We don't know. So we really did have some kind of exploratory questions and went into it feeling like we were using the best science we had, but didn't really know what we were going to find out. And then we are and continue to be really interested in being more comprehensive with self-management and understanding what the effects are when all three components are used together: self-goal setting and self-reinforcement. So I want to talk through, so here, check part one. I've talked to you about my big ideas about self-management, kind of what I mean and what prompted the work we do. Now I want to move us into my favorite part of this, which is talking about and thinking about barriers and accessibility now. Like kind of this is a think aloud of some of that cognitive work that I did based on the manual. Also, it was based on this framework, this idea that in order to have maximally effective and efficient self-management, we really need to find the sweet spot between two kind of big buckets. We need to use the science that we have to build interventions, SMI interventions, that really use these core components with fidelity. Like, we need to do that. We have science that says which pieces work, which parts are important, and we need to honor that and do that if we want to hopefully have the best outcomes possible. But this is all about the self. This is all about individualization. So the interventions also need to be tailored to individual students and considerations of their strengths and weaknesses and preferences. And so the extent to which we can overlap that with the science, that's where we're going to really see this work. And so kind of our questions were, will that work? What will it look like when we overlap with the individual needs of people with more needs? Will we be able to find that sweet spot? And then we also know, kind of from a framework point of view, that in order for this to be effective at all, we need these foundational pieces to be there. We need to have materials that are engaging. This is just an everybody thing. We need to universally design this and make sure that we have that buy-in and have that engagement. We need to make sure that the people that are helping to support and facilitate these interventions are well trained, and again, can do this with fidelity. That matters. The fidelity matters. We need to make sure that the environments in which these interventions are used are structured, at least initially, so that there can be some predictability for the children or people that are using these interventions to know, like, okay, like, this is the time that I should be doing this, or I shouldn't be doing this. So now I get to monitor my behavior. And that's going to give them opportunities to practice the monitoring skill over and over and over in a way that will reduce their cognitive load and let them really focus on just that skill of monitoring. We need to make sure that we have clear expectations that are communicated to the people that are using these interventions. So if we have people who have different cognitive or intellectual abilities, we need to make sure those expectations are accessible and are truly understood by the people that we are hoping to support. And we need to have clear database decision-making rules that are dictating kind of the movement that happens within these interventions. When we decide that reinforcement is appropriate, or when we decide that a goal is met, like, we need to know what that means. And hopefully, more importantly, the people that are using these interventions for themselves know what that means, at least to some extent. So this is the underlying framework of what we would hope kind of the gold standard of these kind of interventions would be. And so that can give us a place to think, okay, now, what are the barriers to that? What do we need to do and deal with? To back up a little, to give you another kind of zoom out umbrella term, when we talk about barriers, this is just some thinking I've done, especially over the last couple of years. I've done a lot of working with engineers at Cal Poly and thinking about like maker spaces and teaching students to code and do like robotics. That's really brought up a lot of great questions about barriers and really trying to understand what that might look like for people with more extensive support needs. According to the CDC, there are really these kind of 7 buckets of barriers that just in general, when we're thinking about all people, we could be considering as a society or as different societies. So communication barriers that we have, just broadly policy, social, attitudinal, physical, programmatic, transportation. When thinking about this work specifically, I think that communication, attitudinal, and physical barriers are particularly relevant and worth considering. So communication barriers could just have to do with like that cognitive access. Like, are we providing interventions and are we teaching the use of the interventions to our target participant in a way that can be truly understood? Like, can they access everything that they're consuming, including like just the intellectual understanding of what they're consuming? Attitudinally, do we believe they can do it? Like, do we believe it matters for all people to be able to monitor their own behaviors? If we don't, then that's a barrier, obviously, to people accessing this kind of science. And then what physical barriers are there? Like, if we've got students who have multiple disabilities and they're struggling with fine motor skills, maybe a paper pencil format's not accessible. It's just not even something they can easily do. And that could be the same for using tech-based. Do they know how to navigate the different controls? Are they able to push the button, or do they need a scanning feature enabled? So what are some of those things that are needed in order for them to actually just be a user of this intervention? Similarly, when I think then about accessibility, after identifying what those barriers might be, I try to make it a habit to kind of scan these 3 buckets in my head and think, okay, what are all the ways I can then promote physical accessibility? Those features that need to be available so that visual supports, auditory supports, just that the dexterity, fine motor skills are all supported. There's no just like right out of the gate barrier that's just making them not be able to do it for a reason that really shouldn't be a barrier. And then there's digital accessibility when we're talking about things leveraging technology and now getting into more of a high-tech world. What kinds of accessibility features can we access or can we build to make it even more accessible, like text-to-speech features, having embedded visual supports, having embedded I'm trying to think what else, like those scanning features you can turn on an iPad. Just what else can we do? What else can we leverage? And finally, making sure that really thinking about cognitive accessibility. Like, yeah, you might have a beautiful app or a great intervention and it has all these pieces and you can train people to push buttons and do things, but do they understand what they're doing? Do they understand what they're tracking? You can teach anybody to just say yes, 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 but do they know what they're saying yes to? And does it matter in their own life? And can they connect it and generalize that skill so there is an actual improved quality of life? Otherwise, again, like, what are we doing? So those are the kinds of things that I scanned in my brain as we move forward with this project. So now I want to kind of walk through these 3 buckets. This is coming directly from the ProEd manual that Stephen and I wrote. I was flipping through it and trying to just pull out just a couple of the pieces to really show you how we thought deeply about these 3 buckets of self-goal setting, self-monitoring, and self-reinforcement. The thing I think is coolest in this, what I'm about to show you, is the slides on the prerequisite skills that we identified people would need in order to be able to engage in these different behaviors. But first, just globally, again, the big idea of self-goal setting is that these interventions are really understanding that they're a natural starting point for self-management interventions because we're talking about goal-directed behavior. Again, if you having somebody just arbitrarily monitor something they do or don't do doesn't matter if it's not like goal-oriented. And then there's this recognition, again, that for something to really, like, it strikes me as odd that we don't think more about having people set their own goals and identify the behaviors that are personally relevant to them. Again, we know with applied behavior analysis, we can train people to do almost anything. It doesn't mean we should. So it should all be coming from what is ethical and what's meaningful to the individual, of course. And so what could be more, I think, in that spirit than teaching people to understand what goals are and identify their own that are important. So when I thought, okay, well, what would that take? Like for somebody to be able to set their own goal, what would that require they come to the table with? Well, it would require that you understand the concept of personal strengths, personal needs, and personal interests, which might mean you need to understand what a strength is and isn't, what an interest is and isn't, what a need is and isn't. That's step one. And then to be able to apply it to your own self and like go into your own thinking and be like, okay, what are my needs? Like, how do you know? How do you know what your strengths are? So there's a whole lot of kind of pre-training that would need to happen in order for self-goal setting to really be meaningful. A basic thing in order to self-goal set, I think even with the most extensive support needs, you need to be able to select from an array of choices. So if I was to really scaffold this for somebody and say, here's an array of strengths, let's pick the ones that are your strengths, they need to be able to select from an array. So there's just a basic prerequisite skill for choice making. And then they need to understand the concept of most. This was my thinking around like, okay, you can teach what strengths, needs, and interests are, but how do you teach somebody to pick one? And I think it really hinges on the concept of most, because you might identify like, yeah, I really stink at crocheting. I really stink at like, not great at deep sea diving, and I'm struggling to tie my shoe. Like, how do you pick the one that's the most important to you? And that's a personal thing. What makes something most to you is different from what makes something most to somebody else. But there's some pre-work that needs to be done around that concept, because if we skip that, then it's not really again, we're just robotically teaching somebody to go through the steps of setting a goal, but it's not really self-goal setting. It's just us programming something in somebody. So now I'm going to shut my window because it's loud. So now I'm going to do the same thing and talk to you a little bit more in depth about the second big bucket of SMIs, which is self-monitoring. And of course, again, these are the interventions that require or involve somebody collecting data over time about a specific goal behavior by themselves. And again, most scientifically supported and used part of SMI. So what are the prereqs here? When thinking about that, then this is not my own thinking, this is something we've known for a long time, but this is very, very important when we talk about using these different interventions with fidelity. And going back to that framework I showed you in the overlap, that first circle of saying like, okay, we need to follow the science. Here's what needs to be followed in the science. Here's some of those pieces. In order for self-monitoring to be effective and like real for a person and have a meaning, that person needs to be able to discriminate between an occurrence and a non-occurrence of the behavior they're monitoring. They need to understand conceptually what that behavior is and what that behavior is not. Otherwise, they're not really self-monitoring, and it doesn't really matter. They need to have the ability then to collect data in some way that's reliable and pretty accurate over time. One quick aside about accuracy, though, that I think is cool that I've learned about from the SMI data is it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that discrimination and that they know how to collect the data. You could have a student self-monitoring and fibbing about like whether or not they are or are not doing the thing, and not being totally honest or accurate in their own self-monitoring, and it's still likely to have an effect, a therapeutic effect on that behavior. So just knowing that, you can let go of like making them tell the truth. Like it's as long as they're engaging in the monitoring, then they're attending to their behavior no matter what they kind of say. So anyway, we'll come back to that when I show you Go Manage, because we still try to promote accuracy, but it just you don't have, it's not something to not a hill you got to die on. So the other big prerequisite skill is making sure that they can manage the whole system of self-monitoring by themselves to the greatest extent possible. Otherwise, this is like adult delivered monitoring. Like it's again, the self piece is really important. And so if we want them to do that, they need to understand the whole system. Where do they go? Where do they get their checklist? How do they know when to start? How long do they do it? What are their queuing mechanisms? How do they start their queuing mechanism? Is it a thing they need to turn on? Like all of those pieces should be as independently managed as possible. Oh, I think I skipped something. Okay, and last big bucket is considering self-reinforcement. So self-reinforcement is, again, I said there was kind of two big parts. It's this ability to identify, well, this is worded a little differently, but we'll go through. Identify effective reinforcers or rewards. So that's a nice component. You got to know yourself. You got to know it's only reinforcing if you care about it. So to know it's personally reinforcing for yourself that you would want to work towards. And then being able to determine and evaluate your own data to see, have I earned it? And then being able to hopefully independently access it in some way, deliver it to yourself in some way. Those are really the parts that would make something self-reinforcement instead of adult-led reinforcement. And of course, we don't see a lot of standalone self-reinforcement studies there. It's really best when packaged with the whole thing, which is what we're really interested in as our next steps. So, of course, the prereq skills, we want to make sure that students can discriminate between preferred items and non-preferred items. We want to make sure students understand how to accurately and meaningfully evaluate their own behavior and make a determination about when behavioral thresholds have been met. That's complex. That's a tall order, right? And then we need students to have the ability to wait, to be able to exchange those secondary reinforcers for whatever the primary or secondary reinforcer is that they ultimately want to earn. Because we're hoping for them to wait to the end of the monitoring session. So this is one of my favorite slides. I was so excited to make this one. Pulling all that together, thinking about everything, what I know like the gold standard is and what the big ideas are, what the essential pieces are, and what the prerequisite skills we'd want to have in place. And then what we know about barriers for people with extensive support needs. What are we up against? And this was the list I came up with. We're up against engagement. That can be hard. It can be hard to maintain somebody's attention. We're up against making sure people really understand their own target behavior, that they can discriminate between the occurrences and non-occurrence. That is not a small thing. That is a really important piece of this that it all kind of hinges on. And then we also need to make sure they understand just procedurally how to self-monitor, right? And also goal set and reinforce, hopefully. We need to make sure they understand data. They can interpret and evaluate, and they understand goals and how data relates to goals. There's a whole lot going on there. And then if we're talking about leveraging technology, there's a whole nother piece. Can they navigate the app? Can they use it? Do they understand what the app is doing and asking them to do? So this is really what I came up with is our big hurdles. And then based on what we were learning about creating an app, because I've never done that before, was these different ideas, learning about ways that we could mitigate all of these, or at least some of these behaviors, using accessibility features and tech-based features as we worked with this company to build this. So the idea of using a tech-based platform really seemed to be supported really across all of these, but engagement seemed like a great reason to use this. Maybe it will be more engaging for people with extensive support needs if we can embed more colors and sounds and make it just seem somehow more interactive and engaging. Maybe we gamify it. Maybe we have reward structures built into this. So it's really they can hear those coins clink, and it's that in itself is reinforcing, and that's going to add a little bit more than just a worksheet with a checklist. Maybe we can have a theme. Maybe they'll enjoy being part of a story and why they're monitoring, and kind of giving a different way to have a rationale for why to do it, just because it's fun and you're part of this underwater adventure is what we did. And maybe they'll be more engaged if they see themselves in the app. What if we have avatars of the student users or the people who are using this, and we allow customization? And we thought about that a lot. How can we, again, back to that framework, the second big one, the second big circle, which was all about making it personally relevant. Here's some ways we could do that. It's not the most important thing, but maybe that will help. Maybe that will mitigate some barriers. To understand target behaviors, this is where I did a lot of thinking. And I'll show you some more examples of this, but I wanted to take this piece. We know from the literature that training people to do a self-monitoring intervention should always include training of the target goal. But instead of being loose about that, I was very, very explicit about that and used systematic instruction, which is based on applied behavior analysis, and explicit instruction with example and non-example training and model lead test procedures, really model test procedures, to very carefully teach the concept of the target behavior with a mastery criteria required in order for them to start the monitoring at all. So that was like that. They had to show us empirically that they could do that before moving forward. And that needed to be delivered in a way that had high fidelity. So spoiler, we programmed that into the app. The app teaches this in a way that's always going to be done exactly the same way. Understanding the process of how to monitor, ways that we could help make that more accessible was to have visual supports. So leverage visual supports and audio cues really to help them. Like instead of needing to circle like a yes or a no, there's just buttons that come up. One's green and one's red, and it's really clear to see like which one you push. There's video modeling in the beginning that shows them how to do that. Like, this is what the buttons look like. If you're doing the behavior, you push this. If you're not, you do this. And the other thing that we did is decided to employ the use of a pedagogical agent, so like a teacher, like a cartoon teacher in the app. And this is science-based. The use of pedagogical agents to support students with autism and other developmental disabilities is evidence-based. And so we designed a pedagogical agent who would kind of pop up throughout the training phases and then during the data and evaluation phase to help guide a student through that process. So they're just not like just going through the app alone. Understanding the data and goals. I thought a lot about that too. I was like, okay, so at the end of the monitoring session in the app, then they're going to see, like they should have a visual of what their responses were. And somehow this should get graphed. And it shouldn't just be a graph that's in the back end for adults to access. This needs to be something that like students see. But how do we make sure that that matters? Like, how do we make sure they see it and they understand at least kind of what's happening here and what this represents? So I put a lot of thinking into that. And I'll show you when we get to the run through of Go Manage what some of the ways that I address this through visual representations of the data. And then finally, to promote independent use of the app. So it didn't need to be something an adult's just like hovering over and like, no, do this now, is by having this be highly customizable. If it's a student who needs to have scanning features enabled, then we can do that. If we need to customize the amount of time that the monitoring sessions last, we should be able to do that. Maybe some students can only be able to persist for like a 2-minute like monitoring session. Maybe another student can do it for 60 minutes. That should be customizable. Again, back to that second in that framework, that second circle. We wanted to be able to customize the length of the queuing interval. So within that session that they're going to be monitoring their own behavior, how often are they asked to monitor their own behavior? And some students are going to really benefit by being queued like every 20 seconds, while other students are going to be super annoyed by that and want to be queued like every 2 minutes or 5 minutes. So the ability to customize that based on student preference and need and ability was really important. So we did that. And included a lot of cognitive and auditory supports, leveraging tech features like text-to-speech that was also highlighting the words as they were spoken aloud by a pedagogical agent or just embedded instruction in the app. Okay, so that was kind of like what do I do? And we took all this, all these ideas for accessibility, and built our app. So to answer kind of the first question we were wondering, can students with extensive support needs benefit from a SMI intervention that's very carefully constructed to address these barriers and promote accessibility? Yes, they can. That is what we learned. That is what our research showed, and that's what I'm going to share with you next. I think this is now where I get into showing you the app though first. I want to tell you a little bit more about the intervention and show you kind of examples of everything I just described in that table. So this is what it looks like. That's our pedagogical agent. His name is Hawkins. I'm not sure why. Some of these decisions were made by the company, Attainment Company. These kinds of awards through IES are called Small Business Innovation Research Grants, which are cool. It's like a way for research teams at institutions of higher education to partner and right out of the gate with a company that could help actualize this, like that can make this idea that we're thinking of and researching as we go. So we're working together as a team. So they were the programmers. I don't know how to program anything, but they created based on what Stephen and I kind of came up with. We're like, it has to have this feature. It has to have this feature. And it was great fun and sometimes a little maddening. It was great fun overall. So that's the team we had. I've already told you this. It was across these 3 years and it was a lot of work. And the big outcomes that we have is that we created this app itself. So we have this platform, and embedded in the app is the training, both how to understand. You pick a goal, you understand what the goal is, that students get trained or people get trained in that conceptual understanding, they get trained in how to monitor, and then it's just a monitoring tool they can use over and over and over again. It's gamified and there's built-in reinforcement and data collection. The other piece that I've built that I have not tested yet, that I'm still going to show you, and this is what I'm doing next in this line of research, is I really wanted to do all the things I told you I wanted to do and teach this in a meaningful way. So I created like instruction lessons. I created a small curriculum on how to teach self-management to students with less extensive and extensive support needs. It's leveled. I really wanted people to understand how to set their own goals that they could then be monitoring. So the idea is, hopefully, if people are engaging in these learning modules over time, students will really understand how to set a goal. And then that goal can be programmed into Go Manage, and they're really, truly monitoring their own goals. That's the idea. Just a quick, I'm going to kind of walk you through some pictures, and then we'll go to the app itself. It's on it's now on what am I trying to say? It's on the internet. It's not on an iPad. It's both, but anyway. So when you open this app, you get to select a goal. And the goal looks like this. You can scroll through a lot of pre-programmed goals that we really carefully thought of ahead of time. Like, what are some of the most common behaviors that people might want to work on, especially people with more extensive support needs? And like, what are the training components we need to build in so that it's all ready to go? And we have got, I think, 10 that are pre-programmed. When somebody picks a goal, they get this dossier that they can have a text-to-speech feature enabled that basically says, hey, you're going to work on this goal today, and that's your mission. So do it, and you're going to earn coins, and that's really fun. Something like I paraphrase. Once a student, assuming that the student's already done this before and already been trained by the app in this goal. Let's just say this is like the 5th time they're working on this behavior with the app. It would jump straight to the session. And they would see a screen like this. The time is saying how long of a monitoring session this will be. Again, this is totally customizable, but let's see, in this case, it's 10 minutes. And when the student is ready or the child's ready, they just hit start. Once that happens, the screen blacks out. It's just black. So if they're working on a math worksheet, if they're working on tying their shoe, or they're working on something else, this is just now a black screen, whether it's on a Chromebook or an iPhone or an iPad. It's got lots of platforms it can run on. It just goes black. Then, based on whatever the queuing interval was set to, this is what's going to pop up. And it's going to say, are you having whatever the target behavior is, or are you whatever the target behavior is? And they answer yes or no. And again, they've been trained through the app on what this means and how to do it and what to press. So that's what the cue is. There are auditory cues and visual cues that help. If they don't see or hear it right away, there's like another chime or it gets brighter. So there's some things programmed in there to help with just attention getting to. And once they're done with their session, these are what some of the screens look like for the data. This first one here, number 7, is showing it's just a visual representation across all of the different cueing and or opportunities to respond that they had, what they said. So the student said, yes, I was doing the thing the first time. Yes, I was the second time. Nope, not the third time, fourth and fifth. After this screen comes up and the app tells the student, like, hey, this is what you said. Then there's an opportunity, well, actually, then visually, I've asked the programmers to take all of those data and slide them over to the y-axis. So it kind of makes a sideways bar graph, and it can show just at a glance, like, oh, look, you said yes more than you said no. That's it. That's all we need them to get. Like, or you said it about the same, or you said no. It doesn't need to be highly mathematical. It's just really like, what did you say mostly? So we can see that and visually represent that. Before moving on from that, there's an opportunity for teacher verification or adult verification or facilitator verification about the accuracy. And this is where, again, the secret is it doesn't really matter, but it's a great way to help promote students to just take that ownership and be honest with themselves, because that's a great life skill that we could take into our futures. And the idea is not that a person has been sitting there and taking data too. It's not like somebody's been taking in our observer reliability data to make sure that this is accurate. It's meant to be like a ballpark. It's meant to give teachers a way to, or anybody in whatever capacity this is being used, to have a student be doing this independently. Somebody else is doing something else, but you kind of keep an eye. You kind of have a sense of, yeah, they were mostly on top, or they were mostly in their seat, or they were mostly doing this. And so then the teacher can verify. And if they feel like the user was super inaccurate or not being honest or just not getting it right, then that's a chance to say, I'm not going to verify this. We need to practice again, or maybe we need to go back and do the training again. Maybe you just don't understand how to discriminate between that yet, and we need to do that some more. And so it's really just a place to ensure that that comprehension is there. But once a person can verify this, then it goes to their graph of their behavior over time, or their progress towards the goal over time. And again, the big takeaway that we would want people to understand here is just like, what's your trend line? Like, you're doing better, or because it's an increasing goal that you want to increase, you're doing better. Or if it's maybe a goal you want to decrease and you see a decreasing trend, you're doing better. So whatever it is, that's the concept. It doesn't need to be that they're like calculating and understand. Just, am I working towards my goal? Yes or no? Then the app is going to reward them more coins, because up here they get coins just for answering, just for doing the monitoring. And here they get reinforcement for progress towards their goal. So even if they're having a tough time progressing towards their goal and they don't make a lot of progress, they're still going to get rewarded just for doing the self-monitoring, because it's really what we're also trying to teach. So it's double reward. And then finally, they have lots of opportunities to cash in these coins within the app itself. Of course, students might despise all of these things and not want to do any of it. And you could translate this reinforcement system into an external environment. Say, hey, you earned 25 coins. That's awesome. Come and get something from the prize box. But what we thought would be cool is to kind of have a smattering of things. We did a lot of work on user experience, which is new for me. I don't know much about this. And we partnered with a company called Filament Games, and they do a lot of educational game development. And they gave us some feedback on just kind of what children users kind of enjoy. And so we have one way they can cash in their coins is to just get to do this deep sea exploration. And there's a little bit of like ooh, you're going to this deep sea, like there's a little bit of speech that's telling them some stuff. There's an opportunity if they want to find items in the sea, and then like there's going to be something that happens once they find all of those grayed out items. It's going to take multiple sessions for them to find those items, so it's not like a one-off. It's going to take a while. And there's a limited amount of time. They have to pay with coins to be able to use this underwater in order to do this. And once their time runs out, then they're done. And if they want more time, they can monitor again. And so that's how that's set up. But if they don't understand the underwater bit, if they don't like it, they still could just use it and just use the controls to move it's a little submarine, move the submarine around and check out what's in the water. There's also a store. I'll show you the store in a minute. They can go buy hats. I don't know why, but hats, kids love to buy hats for their avatars. They can buy hats for their avatars. And then there's like an arcade where they can use coins to play other little games that have been embedded if they don't like the underwater adventure. My favorite part of the app is this ability to customize their own goal. Oh, it's the embedded trainings. This is what some of the embedded training would look like, and the ability to customize their own goals. So the training that would happen once a goal is selected, if they've never monitored that goal before, or they haven't met the criteria for the training yet, they're going to go through this example, non-example training that's embedded in the app, where the app is going to say, hey, your goal, your behavior is this. This means blah, 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 student-friendly definition. Here is an example of whatever, calm body, staying in your seat, doing your work. Here is an example. This is an example because blah, blah, blah. Here's another example. It's an example because blah, blah, blah. This is not an example because they're not blah, blah, blah. This is an example because blah, blah, blah. It's very structured. There's always 5. So there's 3 items that are examples and 2 items that are non-examples. And the ones that are programmed in are already programmed in. The images are selected. The text to speech has already been programmed in. You don't have to do anything. But if you're creating your own for a student, you can pick your own images. You could even put video clips. You can do images from the device of the student doing the thing or not doing the thing. So it can be very customizable and individualized, which will also help with engagement and comprehension. You can also pull images from the internet, and there's also a photo library that comes loaded with the app. So that's kind of cool. So again, this goes through a model test procedure where the first run through the 5 is going to be modeling for the student. They just listen to the app saying why or why not each of those are or are not an example of the target behavior. Then they get randomized. The order of those 5 items is randomized, and the app is going to test the student to see if they can identify yes or no for each of the items. This is an example, or this is not an example. And there's immediate feedback that's programmed in. So they get error correction, excuse me, programmed right in. It'll tell them like, yes, this is blah, 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 because it is blah, 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 good job. Or no, this was not an example because blah, blah, blah. So that's a cool feature. And then they have to get 4 out of 5 correct. They have to get 80% accuracy with this test phase in order to be able to advance into the actual using the monitoring system. If they don't, they go through it again. As the adult who's facilitating, if they don't and they go through it again, it's still not working, then you might need different images, or you might need to reevaluate the language that you used for the student-friendly definition. It might need more, maybe some prerequisite skills are missing. So it's just a cue to you to teach more. And then, so I'll show you a little more about the customizable goals. This is what it looks like on the back end. Sorry if this is super fuzzy and blurry. I promise I'll show you a clear picture in a minute. But this is just showing that where an adult can type in words, like a phrase for the target behavior. Here it says paying attention. So you get to type that in. You get to say which student user it's for, because you might have multiple student users that are in your Go Manage app that are programmed in, and maybe you've got a goal that's going to work for a small group of people. And so you can say that, like, this is for everybody, all of my users, or it's just for these 2. You get to decide if it's interval recording or frequency. Right now, we only have interval recording available, but eventually we're going to do an upgrade where the kinds of recording that they're doing of their behaviors might be a frequency count instead, because that might make more sense for that kind of behavior. And then you get to set their baseline level, their current level of performance. So if it's paying attention, maybe you're kind of ballparking right now, they're paying attention about 20% of the time. So you would slide that down. And what I'm hoping is that they'll pay attention about 80% of the time. So you would set that here. And you've done that. And then this is what it looks like on the back end, where you, as the adult facilitator, gets to type in what the text to speech is going to say. And you're typing in the explanation for each of the examples and non-examples. This is blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. This is not blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. And we are asking you to type, the language should be very tight, very concise, and it should just map to whatever that student-friendly definition of the target behavior is that you initially wrote. So it shouldn't be a long explanation. It's just, this is paying attention because he's looking at his teacher and doing his work. Maybe that's it, whatever. So, so you're gonna repeat that over. This is not paying attention because he's not looking at his teacher. So you're just gonna use the same language very carefully and explicitly. Self-monitoring. Yeah, and I've told you this. The other customizable thing that I think is super cool is that you can customize the time span and the intervals. And the other thing that is, I would highly recommend to anybody using self-monitoring interventions in any format is to randomize your cueing intervals. Otherwise, if you have them set standard, like every 20 seconds or every 30 seconds, the student is going to be cued instead of on average, but it's static, then you're going to probably see a scallop effect where they may learn and anticipate like, oh, it's coming. I got to do the thing. Okay, I said I did the thing, so now I'm going to peace out for a little bit and I'm going to do the thing again. We don't want that. So if you randomize it, you can avoid that scallop effect. And then I've told you too, there's multiple. Attainment Company is great if you're familiar with Go Talk Nows or any of their other products. They are accessibility, tech accessibility experts. And so they've got many settings that they've enabled for supporting students with scanning. There's an auto scan delay. There's different abilities for with switches to change the ways that they make selections. So it's really a great, robust, I think, accessibility backend. Just more. There's a debounce. You can change the highlighting color based on student need or preferences for the text to speech. You can change the auditory cueing to have none, or to have a speech auditory cue or just a sound auditory cue. You can turn on auditory rollovers, so descriptions are played when a cursor goes over a certain interactive button. It'll explain what that button is for. Oops, sorry. And there is music and sound effects. You'll hear it in a minute. And you can turn that on or off. The spoken directions, though, can never be turned off. So that's part of the fidelity of the program. The reward, I like this. The rewards, you can go in on the back end and go ahead and give them however many coins you want. And so if you need students to really buy in, like you know that they just really need a lot of access to the rewards right out of the gate, you want to make that really kind of increase that delivery. Then you can give them a whole bunch and let them not have to necessarily earn them all. Let them play a bunch and buy in and like it. And then lots of things to customize about the student's avatar appearance, which I think is fun. They love, that's a fun thing to just set up their avatar right out of the gate. Okay, we're at code word number 2. It is self-monitoring. I am going to, if you'll excuse me, I am going to pause for 1 minute to go cough a lot, and I'll be right back. So take a quick second to get your code word, and I'll be right back to give you a demo online.
Thank you, Dr. Wood.
Can I chime in with a comment, Leah?
Sure.
I thought it was really interesting about the whole fibbing thing, and that in the end, it really doesn't matter as much in terms of progress, because that's one thing in teaching self-monitoring that I've gotten a little hung up on in the past. So I thought that was super interesting.
Very cool. I'm hoping we will have a bit of time for chatting at the end also with Dr. Wood. I was thinking as a parent, how much I'm appreciating just the value of all of the little incentives they've put in throughout. I know for a fact how brilliant or how important avatar creating is. And yes, hats, outfits, all of those things. I'm not a gamer myself, so I don't really understand it, but my kids definitely love the games where they can create their own avatar. So
I knew they would like it and was still surprised to see how much they liked it. It was really adorable. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back and we're going to hop on to, you can still see this, yeah? This is called the Attainment Hub. They've just built this, they did this over COVID actually, to put a lot of their tech-based curriculum and programs available on a online format, which is cool. Okay. Charlie is my daughter, and I've created her avatar. You can, If you've got multiple, I don't have them, but if you have multiple people who are using Go Manage, you've got them all here. Just to show you a little of the back end. Here's where I go into Charlie's settings. And so here I have all of the goals that are pre-programmed, and I can select to only give her a couple options right now. Like I don't have to give her access to all of her goals. But I could also give her choice during self-monitoring. Maybe she's working on two things. I'm like, which one do you want to monitor today as we work on ourselves and work on our self-management? But so you can have some control as an adult facilitator to do that. You can create a new goal, which is what I told you that I love so much. And this is what that looks like without being blurry, where you get to very, very succinctly say what that target behavior is, but you also can use language that is familiar to the student. And you're basically saying, are you this or is this this? Again, this is where you set who is this for, and you do the current level. I'm just going to do. I did. Maybe he knows I didn't. Okay. Ooh. Doing my math for Charlie. And now I can import these examples, and I could pick pictures of Charlie doing her math or not doing her math, or I could do a file search. Well, file search would be pulling in the pictures that I had saved as a file, or a web selection where I can go into Google and select whatever I want and do it that way. So that's kind of fun. And then again, this is where I get to explain this is doing math because like my eyes are on my worksheet and I'm, whatever, however you want to operationally define that in a very child-friendly way. These, as you build each of these examples, non-examples, the 3 green spaces will populate with the examples and the 2 red ones will populate with the non-examples. You can kind of see, not going to go through all of those, but other things you can do, you can turn off the goal instruction in the quiz if you've got, I don't know why you would, don't do that. But if you've got a reason to turn that off, even maybe if you're demoing for somebody and you want to skip all that, you can. And the self-monitoring instruction, so it's like the example, non-example, training of the behavior concept, and then the training of how to monitor. You can turn those on or off. You can change, this is where you get to customize the queuing frequency and then the queuing interval. So how long of a duration of time is a student going to be self-monitoring, and how often, how many times within that are they going to be queued to answer the question? And is this going to be randomized or not? If you have a teacher, you can turn off that teacher confirmation if you don't want to even have that part, and you can set what the code is yourself. And then the systems tab under the settings is where you get to play with the music and the sound effects. You can give them more coins right out of the gate, turn on some of these accessibility features for scanning auditory rollovers, and then get into the avatar and really customize the avatar in lots of fun ways. The eyebrows and the body. You can turn on a wheelchair feature if you want to. And that is that. So that's fun.
Welcome to Go Manage.
Oh, I thought you said more. So now I can pick for Charlie, or Charlie would get to pick which one she wants to work on. Maybe she's going to work on doing her work.
Today, your mission is doing your work. You'll get a signal when it's time to think about your behavior. When the signal happens, you'll record how you are doing. If you record for the whole session, you will earn coins.
So now they've got that as they complete goals over time, they'll kind of be added to their folder, and they can go back and access goals they've already completed. So they've got active missions or active goals, and then the goals they've completed.
Your mission is to learn about doing your work.
So this is the training, because this is assuming Charlie hasn't demonstrated 80% mastery.
This is an example of doing your work because he is focused on completing his work.
You can edit even the pre-programmed goals. So if you're like, that is wordy, you can go and change that to be customized and more succinct, which I would do.
This is an example of doing your work because they are writing. This is not doing your work because He is looking at his friend's work. This is an example of doing your work because they are all typing. This is not doing your work because she is looking at the ceiling. Your turn.
And so that was the model
Is
round.
this doing your work?
And this is the test round.
Yes. This is an example of doing your work because they are writing. Is this doing your work?
All right, so now I'm going to get it wrong on purpose.
No. This is not doing your work because he is looking at his friend's work. Is this doing your work?
Sorry, if I could skip through this.
Yes. This is an example of doing your work because they are all typing. Is this doing your work? You're right. This is not doing your work because she is looking at the ceiling. Is this doing your work? Yes. This is an example of doing your work because he is focused on completing his work. Now your mission is to learn about self-monitoring.
So now that whole training phase is complete. I got 4 out of 5 correct, so I can advance into learning about the procedural piece of how to self-monitor using the Go Manage app.
Monitoring means paying attention to what you're doing. People monitor their own behaviors all the time. Let's see how to self-monitor. To self-monitor, think about what you're doing and record it. We will show you a question like this. When you see it, stop and think to yourself, am I doing my goal? Answer the question by pressing yes or no. It's important to pick the answer that is true, even if that answer is no. We will ask you this question a lot while you work. After you answer, go back to doing your work. When you see this screen, you are done with self-monitoring. Show your teacher this screen to review your work. You will see how close you are to making your goal.
We won't do this, but when they're ready, now they actually have completed all of the pre-training stuff and they can do the self-monitoring. So the student can hit start. It's going to gray out like I told you. And then whenever the queuing interval is, it's going to pop up. I am going to take us out of this. You can turn this on or off, but this is so somebody can't just exit if you don't want them to.
Welcome.
And then here's the hats. So as you earn coins, you can buy hats. Again, I don't know why, but this is a crowd pleaser. And there are a couple of games that have been programmed. These are things I hope we can expand upon over time with updates, but they are kind of fun. I've kind of gotten into these. I can't show you the underwater exploration without going through the monitoring. So I'm just going to let you use your imagination, but it is weirdly like satisfying.
Welcome to Go Manage.
Okay. So that is just a quick peek at what that looks like. And now I do want to stop. I've just been saying a lot of words at you. If there's any questions or anything you want to talk about the app before I kind of do a quick and dirty go through of the research, I want to show you a little bit of the outcomes. But if there's anything I can explain better or more, or questions I can answer, please ask. Yeah.
I just had a question about kind of the age that you were gearing this towards, if I miss it, because I noticed the examples and non-examples seem to be kind of younger kids, and I could see this like for a lot of my older students.
Yeah.
So I just was wondering what you guys were thinking and what that might look like for kind of.
Totally. I'll show you what I love about showing the research is I'll show you too, like what we did, like who this was for, because that was our big question. This was in our mind in what we tested. We have used this and gotten therapeutic data, like showing that it works for kids K through 8. You can, because it's so customizable, you can also customize based on ages some, which I think is really great. There are younger kids in those pictures, but you could change them all to be older kids. And that's also why that being able to take those pictures of the student themselves, I think can be really powerful. One thing that Stephen and I both have been begging Attainment to do is to have a feature that will just turn off the theme and just let this be a straight tool. Because I mean, not everybody loves underwater adventures. So I'm going to continue to push that. I just think it's a really important thing. For the most part, no child was like angry with the theme, but I think that it could be really nice in future updates to either have more themes, more options, or at least to be able to turn it off. But on a whole, I would say that was probably the biggest concern for older students is that it seemed babyish with that kind of theme. Yeah, I totally, and I
for like a high school aged or
exactly.
For my teenagers that I could see them, they don't like looking different, but if it was something more subtle, that they would probably respond better.
Yeah,
Whereas
and sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Oh, sorry,
so excited. No, I got so excited because I'll take this to Attainment too. Like, hey, I presented this because I couldn't agree more. And that's the last thing I want to do is make somebody feel stigmatized or uncomfortable. You can turn the music off, you can turn the sound effects off, and so that helps some. But yeah, I agree. Yeah. So we had a tall order. We looked at usability for the student users. We looked at feasibility for adults to actually implement this in a classroom with multiple kids. We looked at the fidelity of implementation. Are teachers able to do this right, like correctly? The intervention, is this feasible in a classroom setting? This was all classroom-based research, but again, it can be across any environment, but that's what this was. And then what was the impact of the outcomes? Did it affect student behavior? We worked with a lot of people in terms of working with students with extensive support needs, and just the two of us being the research team. The focus groups, we had extensive focus groups, 2 years of focus groups, and we worked with 12 teachers from 3 districts. They got to know this very, very well. They had access to these prototypes and they used it in their classroom for 2 years. And this was teachers for students with extensive and less extensive support needs in grades K-8 in California. When we actually did a study, we limited it a little bit more. We were working with 7 different teachers across 2 districts, but same student population. It was a total of 16 students that we did single case design research for. And we had not quite half of them had extensive support needs, but that was our goal. We were a little under half. I'm not going to read you all this. This is basic inclusion criteria, but how we were defining extensive support needs as students with meeting the federal definition in the United States for intellectual disability or autism spectrum disorder in the moderate to severe range of needs and enrollment in grade K-8, but that they could identify at least 30 sight words or something. They had some prerequisite skills in order to be able to meaningfully use the iPad. Setting varied with 2 different districts that varied in sizes and varied in student demographics. We worked in middle schools and elementary schools. And we had a really fun time kind of iterating through our process and learning as we went. And we were really invested in learning. And I think that was great fun. So we started with we just kind of piloted this with 1 student. I learned a lot from our failures, and part 2 and part 3 were really where we saw some fun things happen. And we learned the best way scientifically to ask these questions and evaluate these questions, but we really got to work with lots of students. And this work in parts 1, 2, and 3, every single student participant was their own experimental control. And so these were all like basically a series of different single case design studies because of the type of design we used. So we did a lot. We ended with a class-wide pilot. At the very end, we were like, what if we did it in a whole class and like introduce this to everybody, give every kid an iPad and pre-trained everybody together. And then just during math, maybe it's like go manage time. Spoiler, that was awesome. They loved it. We learned a lot about how to teach at a class-wide level. It was the very end of the school year and our data did not come through. Like we just didn't get any. But anecdotally, it was a fun thing. So this was single case design research. We used visual analysis. We were really invested in being as stringent as we could. So we were careful to use visual structured criterion. We used, to demonstrate the magnitude, we looked at the non-overlap of all pairs. We really wanted to make sure with using such a few number of participants, particularly when it was an N of 1 for every standalone study, and there were only 10 data points, 5 in each condition, and we needed to be as stringent as possible, and we were. So part 1, just real quick, we did a withdrawal design. That was a huge mistake. We worked with an 11-year-old in this case with less extensive support needs. And his DV was looking at academic engagement in his general education math class. And we used momentary time sampling procedures to collect our own data on his academic engagement. It's like every 15 seconds we coded if he was engaged or not engaged over a 10-minute period. He used the Goal Manage app during the B phases of the ABAB design. That included the training that came first. And of course, we did fidelity, IOA, and social validity data. We didn't get anything, but here's why. We didn't do a great design for this because he generalized, like he learned, and he generalized what he learned in the B phase, in the intervention, to then his next return to baseline. Also, his return to baseline really upset him. He wanted Go Manage. He was ticked off. We also learned the importance of making sure that the adult user understands what kinds of DVs are appropriate for self-monitoring. We didn't, as researchers, know going into this. We were specific with the teacher. We said we need a student who has a behavior that's in their repertoire that they can do, but they're not doing at a level that is as beneficial as possible for that student. That part is critical. Self-monitoring is not going to teach a kid how to do math. So if the teaching's not there, if it's an instructional deficit, it's not fair to say, hey, monitor yourself as you continue to struggle. So that was happening and we didn't know it. He was being asked to do a math worksheet in his general education math class, and he didn't have the scaffolds or supports he didn't know what he was doing. So he was just sitting there with this math worksheet, and it was painful to watch. So we were so sad by that, and learned how we pulled it. We took the teacher aside, we put some scaffolds in place that he could have in all of the conditions, but that was a good learning experience for us. So he loved it, and he asked for it. It just, we learned some hard lessons. We needed to change our design. We changed to an alternating treatment so that we could mitigate that carryover effect, even though that's awesome. It's just not great scientifically. We didn't want to have that repeated failure, frustration, and baseline. So we did away with the baseline. We didn't, usually with alternating treatment, I do a baseline phase first and then go. We didn't do that. We just went straight into the randomized conditions so that we wouldn't have to have a student be frustrated in that way. And we understood now, as we talked to adults and found student participants, that we were finding DVs that were in their repertoire and wouldn't make them feel bad if they were asked to take data on their own performance. So we did that. We used an alternating treatment design, a way that it's been used often in the research, to compare novel treatment with no treatment. Sometimes alternating treatments are comparing two treatments. In our case, we did randomized conditions of Go Manage versus business as usual within the same context of whatever it was they're doing each time. And so we continued our momentary time sampling, usually it was, or frequency count of whatever the DV was. The DVs were individualized for each student. One of the reasons we didn't do a multiple probe across participants' design is we wanted to have as much individualization as possible. And so we wanted each different user, again, back to that framework in that second bubble, to have a DV that was right for them. We wanted to have a measurement system that matched that DV, and we wanted to be able to customize things like the amount of the length of the queuing interval and such. So we couldn't control for that kind of variance, so we made each student their own control. Let's see, this time, this was great fun. We worked with 2 students with extensive support needs. They were 13 and 10 years old, and they both had autism spectrum disorder and an intellectual disability. And their DVs were both academic engagement and digits produced on a math worksheet. These were students who were really impacted by their disabilities, had very limited verbal speech, required almost constant adult attention and prompting, one-on-one support. And they killed it. This was like one of those times where we were like teary-eyed. We knew it would work, but not this. It's just really, really great kind of affirmation of what we were doing. And it clicked. We just watched it click. It worked better for the students with extensive support needs than it did for the student with less extensive support needs. The ATDs worked well. We didn't see that frustration happen. And it gave us the confirmation to basically scale up in our part 3 of this iteration and do this with more students. What we couldn't do, though, and what we learned and took and changed in our part 3 is we couldn't control for the effect of the training procedures versus the self-monitoring alone because of when we train them. Because it could be, there's an argument, and I've seen this in literature that I've reviewed on self-monitoring interventions for people with more extensive support needs. You can just teach them how to change their behaviors by training them about their behaviors, like a lot of the time. So we wanted to see, okay, does it matter though, differentially when they're self-monitoring? Is it the self-monitoring, or is it just because we've trained them really well with explicit instruction on identifying the behavior? So this time, going into part 3, we controlled for that. But I get ahead of myself. This was not in effect. This was a student with a less extensive support need, who was having lots of difficulties at this point. She had medication changes, she had changes in her attendance, and it just was a really bad time to try to get a kid to do a self-monitoring intervention. Anecdotally, though, she reported that she liked it and she asked for using Go Manage, and that was cool. But here's our 2 students with extensive support needs, the 10-year-old and the 13-year-old. So it's strong effect sizes, clear, no overlapping data, and a clear increase in their % of time on task when they used Go Manage. So I know this is a lot, sorry, let me summarize the summary. We saw these clear functional relations for these 2 students, and that was thrilling. We saw their engagement levels basically double during the Go Manage phase. We saw that, again, I told you that the student with less extensive support needs had serious medication changes, but did enjoy using Go Manage. We did also notice, though, that some students would get distracted by Go Manage. She would especially, and she got kind of fixated on editing her character and instead of like doing what she was supposed to do. So that was important to know. So now the really big part, this is where we expanded to 9 participants. Now we're really curious about for whom is this effective? And we worked with 4 students with extensive support needs and 5 with less extensive. And again, the DVs varied. We went and spent time in each classroom, got to know the students so that we were sure we were picking dependent variables that were socially appropriate for these students. This was a student, an 8th grade student. I'm only going to show you the students with extensive support needs. We're going to, no offense to the less extensive, but I'm going to show you the extensive support need data. This was great. The student did great. Here's another one on engagement. This is a student that was frequently eloping, but when he used Go Manage, it really changed. He just kind of plugged in. It's a student with no vocal speech and very low engagement. He needed so much adult prompting when he wasn't using it and a lot less when he was. And that was cool. But our students with the most extensive support needs we worked with, we took data on the amount of adult prompting and how it affected how much was delivered during these sessions. And that was really neat to see. This was a really sweet, lovely student. He, in this case, blew our idea that like a alternating treatment design was going to control for the carryover effect. And he started to become his own, like he took some of even the language of Go Manage, and on sessions where he didn't have Go Manage, he would say to himself, I'm doing my work. And he would just like check in and monitor himself without the app. He loved it so much. So we couldn't be prouder of this kid and loved to see how much he loved it. There's no functional relationship because of what happened, but we don't care. It was still great. So in summary, that was amazing. That was great fun to see, the really pretty dramatic effects for particularly students with extensive support needs. And then, like I mentioned, We had a part 4. We didn't get to get really good data on this part 4. We did get some. It wasn't great because, again, it generalized. They got so excited about the concept of self-monitoring that they would self-monitor even when they didn't have Go Manage. So we just got kind of data. We also didn't get a lot. So I can't wait to get back into a larger group setting and try to do this in a larger group kind of intervention. It was really, really fun. I think I said all this. Yeah. So they were generalizing the self-management skills across conditions, and we even saw them tallying on their worksheet. When they didn't have the tech-based, they made their own, like they figured out how to do a paper-based self-monitoring, and they just started to tally if they were doing their work or not doing their work. I don't even know what their queuing mechanism was, but they would just like, oh, and they would tally. It was really cool. So
Dr. Wood, I really hate,
yeah.
oh, you're on key takeaways. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah,
I was just going to say,
I know.
12 o'clock.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I have so much to say.
This is great. Thank you.
Key takeaways. This was effective for kids K-8 with less extensive and extensive support needs. It might not be as effective for students with emotional behavior disorders, just based on some of the student characteristics. I think it's an appropriate intervention for changing target behaviors that are related to engagement, specifically responding, productivity, and decreasing levels of adult prompting. It's not appropriate for changing behaviors that aren't currently in somebody's repertoire. That's just mean. And we found that Go Manage there's usability and feasibility were really, really positive for both students and teachers. So those are key takeaways. It's easy to use, can use across contexts. They like the engagement features. They asked to use this. And we saw them generalizing their own self-monitoring skills, which was totally unexpected. So final question, we're not sure if it's beneficial for all 3 components. I've got some modules that I'm going to test now. I told you about these. I've got these really explicit instruction and systematic instruction lessons to teach kids to, even with extensive support needs, to develop their own goals that could then be programmed in. But those are next steps. So, nope, stop it. Nope, skip you. Questions? I'm going to skip your 3rd word is reinforcement. If you have any questions about self-monitoring or Go Manage, I would love to hear from you. If you ever want to see these modules that I didn't get to show you because I talked so much, write me and I'm happy to send them to you and you can check them out. Yeah, I think that's it. But thank you so much for going on this wild ride with me. I really appreciate you being here and learning.